The Verk fleet came in low. That was the first sign it was not a routine pass. Commodore Sereth Dahl of the Galactic Compact's 3rd Diplomatic Arm had intercepted 17 Verk approaches in her career, and they all came in high, a deliberate posture borrowed from their aerial evolution, the reflex of a species that had once hunted from cliff faces. High approach said, "We are surveilling." Low approach said, "We are already inside your threshold." Those were very different messages, and the Commodore had been standing on Station Ardennes' sensor bridge for 40 minutes trying to decide whether the second message was intended, or whether it was the result of a navigation calculation that had nothing to do with posture. By the time the formation settled into orbital holding, she had decided it was intended. She left the sensor bridge and went to find the ambassador. Ambassador Lena Vasquez was on the observation deck. She was there most mornings. Sereth Dahl had logged enough observation time with her now to understand that the observation deck was where the ambassador thought, the way other people thought in their offices or their sleep. She stood at the main viewport with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had brewed herself, because the station's dispensary didn't know what coffee was, and she wasn't willing to start a diplomatic incident over it. The coffee was slightly too strong and slightly too hot. Lena drank it anyway. Outside the viewport, the gas giant Thuris IX turned in slow amber and ochre bands. It was an enormous, indifferent presence, the planet 11 times Jupiter's mass, its upper atmosphere a continuous storm that had been raging for longer than humanity's oldest civilizations. Lena had told Sereth Dahl once, early in their working relationship, that she found large planetary bodies calming. "They've been here so much longer than any argument," she'd said. "They put things in perspective." Sereth Dahl had considered this for several seconds and found that she didn't disagree. "The Verk have made contact," the Commodore said when she reached the ambassador. "They are requesting an immediate precession audience. Protocol allows us to delay up to 6 standard hours." Lena kept her eyes on the planet. How many ships? 11 in formation, 2 holding at the transit threshold. 13 total, a beat of silence. "That's not a negotiating party, that's a statement." "Yes." Lena drank from her mug. She did not appear to hurry the thought. "Grant the audience," she said at last. "Now, not in 6 hours." Sereth Dahl's skin shifted color almost imperceptibly, the compact equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "That is contrary to standard procedure. We lose leverage by appearing eager. We lose time by appearing afraid." Lena turned from the viewport. Her face was the face she wore in the early part of any engagement, attentive, composed, not performing anything yet. "They came in low." "Did you catch that?" A pause. "I did." "What does it mean to you?" "That they anticipate a short engagement, or that they wish us to believe they do." "To me," Lena said, "it means somebody in their command chain is nervous. The high approach is the Verk default. Every briefing I've ever read says it's almost biological. It's the posture of a species that evolved as aerial predators. Coming in from above is how they think about superiority. You don't change that unless something in your calculus has shifted." She turned the mug in her hands. "Nervous people make bad decisions when you keep them waiting in a corridor. If whoever put that formation together is nervous, we want them at the table before that nervousness has 6 hours to curdle." Sereth Dahl processed this. "The precession can be ready in 90 minutes, she said. 80, bring out the good chairs." The Commodore stopped. "The good chairs." "The ones from storage. The cushioned ones we keep for compact High Council visits." Lena set her mug down on the railing beside the viewport. "If the Verk come in expecting to find us rattled and instead find cushioned chairs and a human who had time to make coffee, that tells them something worth knowing." "What does it tell them?" "That we're not performing panic." Lena retrieved her mug, set it up. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Ambassador Vasquez's personal file, which Sereth Dahl had read thoroughly as a matter of professional preparation, in the week before Lena arrived at Station Ardennes, contained a career of 18 years that read, on the surface, like a series of unremarkable diplomatic successes. The Korth border mediation, the Sullen resource-sharing framework, the Drev trade compact, names that appeared in footnotes in broader histories of compact expansion, mentioned as precedents, rarely analyzed. What the file could not tell you, and what Sareth Dahl had been gradually coming to understand through observation, was how those successes had happened. The documented records showed outcomes. They did not show the 80 minutes before the session, where someone had decided what kind of chairs to put in the room. Sareth Dahl had served under 12 human officers and diplomats in her career. She had found them variable in competence and highly variable in temperament. Lena Vasquez was the first one who had made the Commodore feel that she was watching something she did not have a frame for, not because it was exotic, but because it was so thoroughly ordinary that it kept catching her off guard. She thought about this while supervising the installation of the cushioned chairs in Conference Suite 1. The Verk envoy was named Kethorin Dusavril, and he arrived with 4 sub-commanders and a body language that communicated absolute certainty in the way that only people who are not absolutely certain ever manage to communicate it. He was broad through the upper thorax, gray-scaled, with the double-lidded amber eyes of his people, and a set of resonance crests behind his temples that were currently in the flat position. Sareth Dahl's reading of Verk biology identified flat crests as something between controlled and aggressive, the external indicator of internal suppression. He moved through the doorway of Conference Suite 1 the way someone walks into a room they have already decided the dimensions of. He stopped when he saw the chairs. It was only a fraction of a second, a hitch in his stride, a recalibration happening behind those amber eyes. Sareth Dahl, standing at the perimeter of the room, watched it happen with the focused attention of someone who has learned to read what happens in the first 3 seconds of any room entry. The hitch said, "This is not what I modeled." Lena Vasquez was standing at the conference table, not sitting, standing, which was technically the position of someone who has not yet settled, who has options, who is not committed to the table yet. She raised her hand in the human greeting that the Verk would have been briefed on and extended it across the table. "Envoy Dusavril, thank you for coming." The handshake was not a Verk custom. Kethorin Dusavril had been briefed on it. But knowing about a handshake and receiving one from a human who was standing in a room with cushioned chairs in it, those were different experiences. The briefing couldn't cover the texture. Sareth Dahl had observed this phenomenon before. Humans offering physical greetings that required the other party to make a choice in real time, in public, in front of their subordinates. Accept the gesture and inhabit a posture that was not native. Decline it and perform the refusal in front of everyone. It was a trap only if you treated it as one. Kethorin Dusavril took her hand. His grip was careful. Lena matched it, not weak, not aggressive, present. "Please sit down," she said when the handshake was done. "Can I offer you something?" "We have water and we have," she paused, and let something that was almost a smile find her face. "I tried to get coffee, but it turns out I only made enough for one." One of the sub-commanders made a sound. The translator produced nothing, whatever it was sat below the threshold of its detection parameters. But Sareth Dahl was watching the sub-commander's resonance crests, and they had moved from flat to something fractionally softer. She filed this away. They sat. Kethorin Dusavril placed a data tablet on the table between them almost immediately, the gesture of someone who has a prepared opening and intends to use it before the other party can establish a different frame. He activated the projection field, a star map. Several sectors of contested space, rendered in Verk diplomatic red. "The matter before this session," he said, through the translator that fed into Lena's earpiece, "is the human colony ship Perseverance, which on the 43rd standard day of this quarter entered a declared Verk restricted zone and conducted survey operations for 11 hours and 42 minutes before withdrawing. The Verk hegemony characterizes this as a deliberate intrusion, a violation of established territorial conventions, and an act requiring formal acknowledgement and remedy from the Compact's Earth member. It was a prepared statement. Sareth Dahl recognized the cadence. It had the quality of text that had been reviewed by multiple officers before delivery. Lena let the statement settle for a beat. Not long enough to seem stalling. Long enough to signal that she had heard it completely and was not going to respond to only part of it. Which restricted zone, she asked. There are 4 in that cluster. A fractional pause. Zone 7. Lena looked at the coordinates in the projection. The Perseverance is a civilian science vessel. You have their registry data. We do. And it shows they're funded by the University of New Nairobi's astrogeology faculty, operating under an independent research charter. She looked at the map as she spoke, not at him, which Sareth Dahl recognized as a deliberate choice. It said, "I'm looking at the same information you're looking at, not performing confrontation." It does, Catherine Dussevrel said. Which means they were likely conducting lithographic surveys of the planetary body at coordinates. Lena glanced at the projection and named them with a precision that told Sareth Dahl the ambassador had done her homework at a level that nobody had expected. Because there's an anomalous mineral signature, they're consistent with a precursor era formation event, and the New Nairobi faculty have been trying to get a research permit for that specific body for approximately 3 years. She looked at Catherine Dussevrel. The permit was denied by the Compact's own resource authority, not by the Verk hegemony. Are you aware of that? The room was quiet. I am reviewing my briefing materials, Catherine Dussevrel said after a moment. Take your time, Lena said. She poured herself a glass of water from the carafe on the table. She poured one for him too, and set it in front of him without asking, without ceremony, in the way of someone for whom offering was simply a reflex. He looked at the glass. He did not drink it. He did not push it away. One of Catherine Dussevrel's sub-commanders, a younger officer, Resonance Crest's mobile, clearly paying sharp attention, leaned slightly forward. Sareth Dahl noted the motion and filed it. The first 90 minutes of the session covered the evidentiary ground. The Perseverance's route data, the registered survey equipment it carried, the specific mineral signature that the New Nairobi faculty had been publicly pursuing in journal publications for 6 years, the permit denial records, the boundary notification protocol that had apparently not reached the vessel's captain through any channel she could be demonstrated to have received. Lena laid this out not as argument but as shared information. She named each item, placed it in the record, and invited the Verk party to verify each element before the session moved to the next. It was, Sareth Dahl realized, a methodology she had never seen used in quite this way. Most diplomatic sessions either concealed unfavorable information or deployed it as counterargument. Lena's approach was to surface everything first, including the elements that complicated Earth's position, and let the complexity of the picture do work that argument couldn't. Catherine Dussevrel requested a recess at the 2-hour mark. Sareth Dahl found Lena in the corridor outside the conference suite, standing at the viewport she favored, the one with the gas giant view. She had retrieved her mug somehow and refilled it. "He's conferring with his ship," Sareth Dahl said. "I know. The formation has not moved. It won't yet." The Commodore folded her fingers. "Ambassador, I want to understand your approach." You gave him information that reframed the entire predicate of this session. The Perseverance crew were in violation of Zone 7's boundary regardless of their civilian status or their permit history. Acknowledging the sequence as you did, that they were denied by our own compact authority, not by the hegemony, removes a diplomatic card from our hand. If the session goes badly, we have given away a position we could have held. We gave away a bad position, Lena said. A defensive one. Holding that position would have required us to spend most of this session establishing that a civilian geology crew stumbled into a restricted zone because of a permit denial information failure, while performing as though that was a complex legal matter rather than a straightforward administrative gap. She drank from her mug. That's 12 hours minimum of a performance that nobody in the room believes, followed by a face-saving formula that gives both sides nothing and ensures the next encounter goes the same way. And the alternative? Give him the picture. She looked at the planet. He came in with 11 warships on a low approach. He came in ready to be right, which is always the most dangerous configuration. Someone who's already decided they're right has no use for new information. They just need a surface to project it onto. If I sit across the table and perform indignation while he performs grievance, I give him that surface. The performance has an audience. It sustains itself. She turned the mug in her hands. If I give him a way to be right that doesn't require anyone to be wrong, if I turn the situation from a confrontation into a shared diagnostic, something different becomes possible. He goes back to his ship. He tells his command that the situation was more complex than the initial report indicated. His commanders, who I'm choosing to believe are not idiots, use that complexity as cover to accept a quieter resolution. And somewhere in the hegemony's diplomatic core, somebody gets a note about how this session went. Sarath Dahl considered this. You are managing several timescales simultaneously. I'm trying to. A pause. The session in front of us, the incident report that goes up the hegemony chain, the characterization of Earth Federation diplomacy that Kethoran Dusavral carries with him from this station, the bilateral relationship, 6 months from now, between parties who have either hardened or softened based on what happens in this corridor in the next 40 minutes. She paused again. I can only work the one I'm standing in. But I can work it with an awareness of the others. Sarath Dahl looked at her for a long moment. When you say nervous people make bad decisions, she said, you are not only referring to the Verk party. Lena looked at her sideways. What do you think you're nervous about? The formation, 13 ships, the precedent of a session that appears to weaken the compact's position on territorial sovereignty. Those are real concerns, Lena said. I have them too. She finished her coffee. The question is whether the way to address them is through this session or through a posture that makes this session fail. And I think the way to address them is through the session, but I need you with me on that. Sarath Dahl was quiet. I am with you, she said. I am, she searched for the right word, observing. Lena smiled just slightly. That's all I ask. Kethoran Dusavral came back into the room 15 minutes later, and the quality of the room changed when he did. Sarath Dahl noticed it in the first few seconds, the easing in his upper thorax, the way his resonance crests had moved to a position that her reading of Verk biology placed somewhere between neutral and thoughtful. He had been on his ship. He had received new information, or had old information reframed for him. He had come back into the room with a slightly different question than the one he'd arrived with. Lena gave him time to find the question's shape. The compact permits committee, he said at last, and his cadence was different now, deliberate, as though he was building something word by word rather than delivering a prepared statement. Appears to have denied the research permit for the precursor formation body on grounds of proximity to Verk-designated space. That's my read of it too. If the denial was partly to defer to hegemony territorial interests, a pause, choosing, then the hegemony's characterization of the Perseverance's actions as willful intrusion is not fully accurate. I don't think the crew of the Perseverance had any meaningful awareness that the zone existed, Lena said. I think a group of geologists looked at a mineral signature they've been pursuing in the literature for 6 years and flew toward it. That is a failure of our information systems. It is not an act of provocation. She paused. But I want to be clear about something, Envoy. His eyes steadied. "I'm not saying this to win an argument," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think you know it's true, and because I think you came in here with ships on a low approach because somewhere between the Perseverance's incursion and this conference table, the reporting chain sharpened a straightforward administrative failure into a provocation narrative." She held his gaze steadily. "That kind of sharpening happens. It happens in our systems too. Someone at a desk somewhere writes a summary and uses the word deliberate because it makes the report feel more urgent. And by the time it's been through 4 more summaries, something nobody intended has become something everyone believes. I would rather we name that process here than let it drive the next 6 weeks of posture." The room was very quiet. One of the sub-commanders, the young one with the mobile crests, made a sound. The translator produced nothing. Cathorin Dusavral looked at his glass of water. He picked it up. He drank from it, a long, deliberate sip that seemed to Sareth Dahl like a decision being made physically, the way some decisions need a body to move through them, and set it back down. "You are," he said, "not what I was led to expect from a human ambassador." "What were you led to expect?" "Aggression, territorial assertion, a performance of injury designed to extract maximum concession." Lena tilted her head slightly. "That's a previous generation's playbook. We tried it. It works about 40% of the time and catastrophically fails the other 60, and the failures tend to compound in ways the successes don't recover." She leaned back. "I find that talking, actual talking, where both parties try to see the actual shape of the problem, tends to have a better average, even accounting for the sessions where it doesn't work." Something moved across Cathorin Dusavral's face. Not a smile. Sareth Dahl was not certain whether Verk faces made smiles, exactly, but something in the register of a smile, an easing of the architecture. "There are those in the hegemony," he said, "who argue that humans negotiate from a position of concealed threat, that the reasonableness is a mask, that beneath the open manner, you are simply better at hiding strategic depth than species who broadcast their positions." "Some of us are reasonable because we are strategically deep," Lena said. "Some of us are reasonable because our grandmothers told us to be, and we were young when they told us, and some things get into you early and don't come out." She paused. "In my case, honestly, it's probably both. But I'll tell you something. I've met the strategically deep masquerading as reasonable type, and I've met the genuinely my grandmother told me type, and the difference tends to show up not in the session where everything is going well but in the session where things start going badly. The mask slips under pressure. This," she gestured at the space between them, "this is not a mask. It's just how I work." They found the resolution in the 3rd hour. It was not elegant. Resolutions at this level were never elegant. They were load-bearing compromises dressed in careful language, built for durability rather than beauty. But what they built was functional. The Perseverance crew would submit to a compact inquiry, standard procedure, the minimum required acknowledgement of a boundary violation, which would produce documentation of the permit denial history and the notification gap. The Verk hegemony would formally receive the inquiry findings and would not characterize the incursion as a precedent for future civilian access to restricted zones. Zone 7's boundary notification protocols would be reviewed by a joint subcommittee convening within the standard quarter. The subcommittee's existence gave both sides' bureaucracies something to do, gave both sides' press offices something to announce, and would, if it produced what Lena was quietly hoping it would produce, result in a notification system that actually worked. It wasn't peace. It wasn't a treaty. It was the avoidance of a thing that would have cost lives, not today, perhaps not this year, but eventually, the way all unresolved tensions eventually cost lives if left to do what tensions do when they're not resolved. Lena had explained this logic to her early mentors and found that most of them didn't find it satisfying. People wanted victories. They wanted to be able to point at an outcome and say, "We got this." Preventing a future that didn't happen was hard to point at. It was mostly invisible, but it was the work she found she was best at, and she had made a kind of peace with the invisibility. When the chamber cleared, Sereth Dahl remained. She stood at the table where the data tablet still projected the star map, the Verk red sectors glowing softly in an otherwise dimmed room. 11 warships, she said, on a low approach. Yes. And we resolved it with cushioned chairs and water, and 3 hours of talking. And 18 years of practice, Lena said, and the fact that Kethorin Dussavril is an intelligent person who was given a bad brief, not a fanatic who wanted a war. She picked up the carafe from the table. There was still water in it. She held it without pouring. The chairs didn't do the work. The chairs just gave him a frame that wasn't I walked into an ambush. The water was the same. Every little signal that said the person across this table is trying to solve a problem, not win a fight. That's what did the work. The chairs just made those signals easier to read. Sereth Dahl was quiet for a long time, looking at the star map. I have been a compact officer for 22 years, she said finally. I have been present at 43 diplomatic sessions. I want to tell you something, Ambassador, that I have not said to any human I have worked with before. Lena waited. I do not always understand what humans are doing, Sereth Dahl said. I understand the mechanics. I understand the words and the procedures. But there is a register of human interaction that operates below strategy. Not quite social convention, not quite emotional demonstration. Something in between. Something that changes the physics of a room sometimes, and I cannot always identify the exact mechanism. She paused. This was an example of that, and I would like, another pause longer, I would like to understand it better. Lena looked at her for a moment. Ask me anything you want, she said. I mean that. Later, Sereth Dahl said, when this is fully processed. Whenever you're ready. The message came 2 days later, relayed through the Compact's standard diplomatic channel with the Verk hegemony's official seal. It was brief. Verk diplomatic correspondence ran economical, a quality of a species that had evolved in an environment where sound carried farther than you expected, and you learned to say only what you meant. What it said was clear. The subcommittee for Zone 7 boundary notification review would convene within the standard quarter. The hegemony's senior liaison would be Kethorin Dussavril. Sereth Dahl brought the message to the observation deck, which had become a kind of informal diplomatic annex. He requested the assignment, she said. Probably. That's unusual. Senior envoys don't typically manage their own follow-up subcommittees. The subcommittee is procedural, 2 levels below his rank. He's curious now, Lena said. That's what happens when a room doesn't go the way it was supposed to. The curiosity outlasts the session. She watched the planet turn. And probably someone in his chain is watching him, curious about what he thinks he learned. About humans, Sereth Dahl said. About humans. Lena drank from her mug. She was having a second cup, which was unusual. She typically stopped at one. We're not the most advanced species in the Compact. We're not the strongest, not the most numerous, not the oldest. We've been in space for 340 years, which is recent by any measure. We don't have the longevity or the consensus field communication of the older species, or the technological depth of the Compact's founding members. She paused. But we have this. She searched for the word, and when she found it, it was the simplest one, this habit of treating a situation like it can still change. Even when everything in the room says it's already decided, we just keep acting like the next sentence might be the one that turns it. Is that what humans call optimism? I think it's stubbornness, Lena said, dressed up as optimism so it sounds better at parties. Sereth Dahl made a sound that Lena had learned, over 18 months, to identify as the compact equivalent of a quiet laugh. The exchange program proposal came through official channels this morning, Sereth Dahl said. Kethorin Dussavril. Good. Our preliminary review committee has already flagged it as, I'm quoting, an unprecedented and potentially destabilizing level of access to Federation diplomatic operations. What did you tell them? Sareth Dahl was quiet for a moment. I told them that I had personally observed the Federation's senior ambassador conduct 3 sessions without once attempting to conceal a position, and that if the hegemony wished to send junior officers to watch that, I was confident we had nothing to fear. Lena looked at her. You're learning, she said. I have been observing, Sareth Dahl said. It is, I find, an effective methodology. The subcommittee met 6 weeks later at Compact Neutral Station Viral, a smaller station in a quieter system, with worse chairs and a dispensary that understood tea imperfectly, but understood it better than Station Ardennes understood coffee. Lena attended every session as the Earth Federation's observer. She was not required to. As observer, she could have sent a note-taker. She attended because the granular work, the review of notification databases, the comparison of geodetic survey methodologies, the careful argument about what the word designated meant in interstellar cartographic conventions, was where positions actually changed. Positions only changed when someone was present to witness the change and quietly confirm, through their continued presence, that it was acceptable to have made it. On the second day, Kethorin Dussavril found her in the recess corridor, the one with the viewport that had an unremarkable brown dwarf and some debris field in it, which was not Thuris IX but was still something to look at. He stood beside her without preamble. She did not speak. Neither did he. They watched the brown dwarf's faint red light catch the debris field, turning pieces of ice and silicate into brief glints that vanished as the station's rotation moved them past. I have been conducting research, he said eventually. She waited. On human social customs. Not the formal registry. I have read the Compact's diplomatic briefings. I mean the underlying patterns. He paused. I requested access to records of human diplomatic sessions going back approximately 60 years. I have been reviewing them. What are you looking for? Consistency, he said. I want to know whether what happened in the conference chamber on Station Ardennes is specific to you, or whether it is characteristic of a human approach. Lena considered this. What did you find? Inconsistency at the individual level, he said. Humans vary considerably. Some of your ambassadors in the record are aggressive, some are passive, some are transactional in the way the hegemony expected you to be. But there is an underlying pattern that persists even through the variation. He paused. A tendency to name the situation, to say aloud what the situation is, including the parts that are unfavorable to one's own position, as a way of establishing that the naming is safe. That truth does not destroy the session. Lena turned to look at him. That's a very precise read, she said. I have been precise about it because I found it difficult to believe the first time I saw it, he said. In Werk diplomatic convention, naming an unfavorable truth is a concession. It reduces your position. It should only be done under duress as the first step of a retreat. He looked at the debris field. In human convention, it appears to function as an invitation, as a demonstration that you will not use truth against the other party, which invites them to offer truth in return. We call it building trust, Lena said. It's not a uniquely human concept. No, but your implementation of it is frequent, reflexive. You do not appear to calculate whether to extend it. You appear to default to it. Most of us do, yes. She watched a piece of silicate catch the light. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you extend trust and the other party takes the extension as a sign of weakness and presses the advantage. That happens, more often than we'd like. And when it happens, we adjust. We don't generalize from one failure to nobody can be trusted. We try to figure out whether that specific party in that specific situation is someone who will exploit offered trust and we modify accordingly for that party. She paused. But we don't change the default, because the failure rate of the alternative is higher. Cathorin Dusevral was quiet. The Verk default is different, he said, and there was something in his voice that Lena's ear couldn't quite identify, not quite regret, not quite apology, but something adjacent. The Verk default is to withhold, to offer nothing until the other party's intentions are established. To establish intentions through repeated interaction over extended periods, before any trust is extended. How long on average? 3 to 5 standard years of interaction is considered the minimum for a meaningful trust relationship to form between Verk parties. Lena absorbed this. That is, she said carefully, a long time to be in the same room with someone without knowing if they're trustworthy. Yes, he said, it is, and it produces a particular kind of weariness in long diplomatic relationships, a weight that accumulates. He paused. I had been in this engagement for 4 hours when you placed that glass of water in front of me. She waited. I did not drink it immediately, he said. Because the Verk convention is that accepting an unsolicited gift is a position signal, it can be read as acknowledging a social debt. But I also understood, and this is what I have been trying to articulate in my field reports, that the water was not a trap, that you had placed it because you had simply considered that I might be thirsty. He looked at her. That distinction. The difference between a gift as a social debt mechanism and a gift as an acknowledgement that another person is present and has needs. That is the thing I have been trying to explain to my command for 6 weeks. Lena was quiet for a moment. Is it working? She asked. The explanation. Partially, he said. The response I receive most frequently is, if humans default to offering, how can you distinguish genuine offering from strategic offering? How do you know when the gift is honest? What do you tell them? I tell them that in the session on Station Ardennes I was watching for the gap, he said, for the moment where the offering became instrumental, where the reasonableness served a play, and I did not find it. He paused. I am aware that this is not conclusive evidence, but it is more evidence than I expected to have. On the 3rd day, the younger sub-commander, Dusevral, Lena had learned, requested a separate word during the recess. They stood in a different corridor, this one with a view of the station's exterior docking ring, all structure and functional geometry, nothing lyrical about it. Ambassador, Dusevral said. His standard was more formal than Cathorin Dusevral's, the cadences of someone who had learned it from texts. I have a question that may be impertinent. Ask it. In the conference chamber, when you told Envoy Dusevral that your grandmother had told you to be reasonable when you were young, he paused. Was that true, or was it a rhetorical move designed to? It was true, Lena said. I thought so, he said. I had difficulty explaining why I thought so, but I did. What made you think so? He considered the question with the seriousness that Lena had been watching in him since the first session, a quality of attention that didn't perform, just operated. The specificity, he said. You used the word grandmother, not my culture or human tradition, a specific person. Specific enough that the detail could be false, but if it were false, the falseness would be detectable in what came after, and nothing in what came after contradicted it. He paused. Strategic rhetoric tends to be less specific. It offers principles and anecdotes. You offered a person. Lena looked at him. You should be in diplomatic work. I am in diplomatic work, he said. Senior diplomatic work, she said. If you're not already on that track, someone is missing something. His resonance crests moved. She was learning to read the crests. This particular motion read to her as surprise that was trying to present as composure. I will note that the human ambassador said so, he said, and there was something in it that might have been dry humor. What's your question, the real one? He was quiet for a moment. Envoy Dusavral has changed his characterization of this engagement in his field reports. He initially characterized it as a compact attempt to reduce the hegemony's leverage through preemptive information disclosure. He has revised that characterization to human social transparency, operating as a de-escalation mechanism. He is recommending that hegemony diplomatic training incorporate analysis of human behavioral models. Dusavral looked at her. My question is that the right characterization? Lena thought about it honestly. Partial, she said. De-escalation mechanism makes it sound more calculated than it usually feels. From the inside, it mostly feels like, she searched for it, trying to solve a problem in a room where someone is afraid, and recognizing that the fear is the obstacle, not the problem, and that the fear needs to be addressed before the problem can be worked on. She looked at the docking ring. Your envoy was afraid. Not personally afraid, I don't mean that kind of fear. Afraid that the situation was already determined, that the script was written, that his only role was to perform the grievance correctly and extract the maximum concession before the performance ended. She paused. When you're in that frame, everything the other party does reads as strategic. The water reads as a trap. The reasonableness reads as a mask. Because you're operating in a world where everyone is playing a game, and the only question is who plays it better. And the countermove, Dusavral said slowly, is to decline to play the game. The countermove is to be genuinely not playing it, which is different. She turned to look at him. If I'm being transparent because I calculated that transparency would produce a better outcome than opacity, I'm still playing the game, just with a different strategy. If I'm being transparent because it's what I actually am, because my grandmother told me to be, and I was young when she told me and it's just in me now. Then when your envoy looks for the gap, the moment where the reasonableness turns instrumental, he doesn't find it, because there is no gap. Dusavral was quiet. The training materials, he said. The ones Envoy Dusavral is recommending. How would you train someone to be genuinely transparent rather than transparently strategic? Lena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know that you can train someone into it, she said. I think it mostly comes from deciding that the alternative, the permanent game playing, the opacity, the exhaustion of managing every interaction as though it's a threat, costs more than it's worth. And making that decision deeply enough that it changes your defaults. She paused. Some people make that decision early like me. Some make it after a long career and a lot of failures. Some never make it. She shrugged. I'm not sure you can train the decision, but you can create conditions where the decision is easier to make. What conditions? Give people evidence that transparency doesn't always get exploited. Let them watch sessions where it works. Let them be in the room when it works so they can see it operating, not just read about it afterward. She looked at him. You've been in the room this week. Dusavral's resonance crest moved again. Yes, he said. I have. On the final day of the subcommittee, after the language was agreed and the record sealed and the secondary bodies given their follow-up tasks, Kethorin Dusavral found Lena again in the corridor with the brown dwarf viewport. She had come back to it because her brain needed somewhere quiet after 4 days of granular work, the same way a muscle needed rest after exertion. He stood beside her. She did not speak. Neither did he. They watched the brown dwarf's light, faint and red, catch the debris field in slow rotation. I have a question, he said eventually. All right. In the conference chamber, when you told me your grandmother had told you to be reasonable and that you were young and some things get in early and do not come out. He paused. You told me this in response to my observation that some in the hegemony believe human reasonableness is a mask. You offered a personal history as evidence that it was not. His amber eyes were on the debris field. I have been thinking about what it costs to offer that, in a diplomatic context, where anything offered can be received as exposure. Lena looked at him sideways, and It costs something, he said. Even if it is habitually done, it costs something each time. He paused. I do not think humans are fully aware of how visible that cost is, to species for whom offering is not the default. Lena was quiet. Tell me about the Verk equivalent, she said. What is the gesture in Verk convention that carries that kind of weight? Not a formal concession, something personal. Something that costs something. He was quiet for longer this time. Verk, he said, the equivalent is silence. There is a specific kind of silence, we have a term for it that does not translate precisely, but the nearest approximation is the silence that does not fill. Most silence in negotiation is strategic, a pause, a consideration, a pressure. The silence that does not fill is different. It is an acknowledgement that the moment does not require anything more from you, that you are content with what is present. He paused. It can only be offered honestly. It cannot be performed. If you try to perform it, it becomes the strategic pause, which is its opposite. Lena turned to look at him. He was looking at the debris field. They stood in silence for a moment, not the strategic kind. I want to recommend, through appropriate channels, he said, a formal exchange program. Junior Verk diplomatic officers observing Federation sessions. Reciprocal access for Federation personnel to observe hegemony diplomatic operations. He paused. This will require significant advocacy in both directions. I am prepared to provide the advocacy on our side. I am asking whether you are prepared to provide it on yours. I'm prepared, Lena said. There will be people who call it a security risk. There will be people who call it naive, he said. Who say I am being managed, that the transparency I observed was exactly the mask they always said it was. What will you tell them? He was quiet. I will tell them, he said slowly, that in 4 days of granular subcommittee work, not the dramatic session, not the formal exchange, but the ordinary hours of reviewing protocols and notification databases, I was watching for the gap, for the moment where the management became visible, where the offering became a trap. He looked at her. I did not find it, and I am a senior envoy who has been watching for gaps for 20 years. Lena nodded. That's what I'll tell them on my side, she said. That a senior Verk envoy with 20 years of diplomatic experience watched us work for a week, specifically looking for the mask and didn't find it. She paused. That won't satisfy everyone. But it'll satisfy enough of the right people. He inclined his head, not the Verk formal acknowledgement. Something slightly different. Something she was beginning to recognize as a gesture that was evolving in real time, that didn't have a name in either convention yet because it hadn't existed before this week. The news coverage characterized the engagement as a smooth functioning of the compact's diplomatic infrastructure. 11 Verk warships had approached on an unusual vector. A precession had been granted. A subcommittee had been established. A resolution had been reached. Compact hegemony normalization trends continued. The Earth Federation's representation had been effective. What the coverage couldn't see was the glass of water, the cushioned chairs, the 40-year-old habit of a woman from a back porch in a valley that smelled like cedar smoke. The junior officer with the mobile resonance crests watching a session from the corridor and forming a hypothesis about what visibility meant as a strategy. The specific texture of a silence that did not fill, offered by someone who had spent 20 years learning to tell it apart from the silence that was performing. None of this appeared in reports. It never did. The infrastructure of trust was built in the moments between documented moments, in the gestures that didn't translate, in the things that got into you early and didn't come out. Sareth Dahl read the coverage on the observation deck of Station Ardennes, standing beside Lena, while Thuris IX turned in its amber and ochre patience. The exchange program came through the formal channels this morning, she said. I know. Catherine Dussevrel is attached as senior hegemony liaison. I know that too. The Commodore was quiet for a moment. Ambassador, she said, Lena, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. When you placed the glass of water in front of him, in the conference chamber, on the first day, she paused. Did you know in that moment that it would matter? Lena was quiet. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the door always open, the pot always on. The way having was different from sharing, and sharing was different from giving, and giving was its own ordinary kind of dignity, learned early, without explanation, in a house where the guests came and went, and the water was always poured without asking. No, she said, I didn't know it would matter, I just did it. That's the part I've been trying to understand, Sareth Dahl said. The not knowing, doing something without being certain it will work. That's most of it, honestly, Lena said. The certainty comes from having done it enough times and seen the averages, but in any specific moment you don't know. She drank from her mug. You just know what happens if you don't try. The gas giant turned, amber and ochre, patient and vast in the deep space beyond the viewport. 11 warships had flown home. A subcommittee was meeting. A junior officer with sharp eyes was writing something in a field report. An envoy with 20 years of watching for gaps was preparing to advocate for something unprecedented. Somewhere in a system Lena had never visited, in a government briefing room she would never see, someone was being told that the human woman had not been playing the game, and that this was more complicated, and more interesting, and more worth attending to than anyone in the room had expected. The next conversation would be different because of this one, and the one after that, and the one after that. Not a treaty, not a triumph. The work done carefully, in the way her grandmother had taught her to do it. Not as strategy, not as performance, just as the ordinary human assumption that someone in the room with you had needs and you could address those needs without asking, and that this was the beginning, usually, of something better than what you'd walked in with. She finished her coffee. The fleet did not return. The door stayed open. 3 months after the subcommittee concluded, the exchange program sent its first cohort. 4 junior Verk diplomatic observers, several among them, arriving at Compact Central Station for a 12-week rotation through 3 active diplomatic operations. Lena was not assigned to host them. She was assigned to a different engagement entirely, a long-running infrastructure negotiation on the far edge of the Compact's second arm, and she was 47 light minutes away when the cohort arrived. She heard about what happened from Sareth Dahl, who heard about it from the protocol officer who processed the cohort's first week. What happened was this. The 4 Verk observers arrived and were assigned to observe a session between the Compact's Resource Authority and a delegation from the Korath Confederacy. A minor administrative dispute over mining extraction permits, nothing delicate, exactly the kind of granular, unremarkable work that Lena had told Avril was where the real changes happened. The session ran 4 hours. It was not interesting. It involved a lot of reviewing of extraction data and arguing carefully about the word adjacent in the context of spatial resource claims. At the end of the session, the Compact's lead administrator offered the Korath delegation tea and a plate of something made in the station's dispensary that was described in the protocol report as a sort of pastry item, origins unclear. The Korath delegation accepted. The 4 Verk observers watched this happen. Afterward, the protocol officer noted in her log, because she logged everything, which was her job, that observer Avril had asked her a question. Was the TN pastry offering a standard end-of-session protocol? Was there a rule that required it? She had told him no. There was no rule. The administrator had simply offered. He had thanked her for the information and returned to his observation notes. The protocol officer thought nothing more of it until, 2 weeks later, she found observer Avril in the station's kitchen annex at an hour when the kitchen annex was not normally occupied, attempting, with some difficulty but significant determination, to learn how the station's tea preparation equipment worked. She asked what he was doing. He told her he was learning to make tea. He wanted to understand, he said, whether the making of it changed the offering, whether the act of preparing something yourself and then offering it was different in some essential way from ordering it from a dispensary and handing it across a table. The protocol officer, who had been doing her job for 12 years and thought she had seen most things, had sat down on a kitchen stool and helped him figure out the equipment. When Sareth Dahl told Lena this story, Lena was quiet for a long time. "He's trying to reverse engineer the grandmother thing," she said finally. "I don't know what that means," Sareth Dahl said. "He's trying to understand whether you can acquire a habit from the outside," Lena said. "Whether practice makes it genuine, whether if you do the thing enough times, it becomes the thing instead of the performance of the thing." A pause from Sareth Dahl's end of the comm. "And can it?" Lena thought about a back porch and cedar smoke, and a grandmother who had never once in her memory been strategic about offering food, who had just offered it, who had simply assumed as a baseline premise that people in her space had needs and the thing to do with that was address them. "I think," she said slowly, "that it depends on why you're practicing. If you're practicing because you calculated that the outcome is better, you might get very good at the mechanics and still have the gap, the moment where it becomes instrumental. But if you're practicing because you want to understand it, because you are genuinely curious about whether the making is different from the ordering," she paused, "then maybe, over time, if you keep asking the protocol officer to sit with you on the kitchen stool." "You think Tess Averill is genuinely curious?" "I think Tess Averill has been genuinely curious about this since the first day in the conference chamber," Lena said, "which is not an accident. People who are genuinely curious can be in the same room as something they don't understand and let themselves not understand it for a while, instead of immediately resolving it into a category they already have." She paused. "That's rarer than it sounds." The exchange program ran for 3 years before it produced its most visible result: a bilateral communications protocol between the Verk hegemony and the Earth Federation that predated, by 11 months, the Compact's equivalent framework. The protocol was not a treaty. It was not a peace accord. It was a mechanism, a set of agreed procedures for notifying each other when a vessel entered contested space, when a survey operation was planned near a boundary, when a summary was traveling up a reporting chain. Small things, administrative things, the kind of thing that prevented a geologist crew from flying toward a mineral signature and generating 11 warships on a low approach. When the announcement came through the Compact's official channels, there was commentary, some of it skeptical. Bilateral frameworks outside the Compact structure were unusual. Some argued it set a precedent for the fragmentation of Compact diplomatic unity. Others argued it was evidence of Earth's tendency to build parallel structures that privileged its own relationships over the collective framework. Catherine Averill issued a statement through the hegemony's diplomatic press office. It was, for a formal diplomatic statement, unusually personal. He wrote, and Lena read it standing at the observation deck of Station Ardennes, which had become, over 3 years, a place she returned to the way you return to the place where something important happened, to check whether it still looks the same, that the protocol was the result of what he called extended mutual observation, that neither party had arrived at it through strategic analysis, that both parties had arrived at it by being, over an extended period, in enough rooms together to establish what the other party actually was. He used the word transparent. He did not put it in quotation marks. The last paragraph of the statement noted that junior diplomatic exchange personnel from both parties had contributed substantially to the protocol's drafting, that the people who had learned to be in the same room as each other for 3 years had produced something that senior officials reviewing the file would not have produced on their own, because they had something the senior officials did not: the accumulated texture of knowing. Tess Averill's name appeared in the acknowledgments. So did 4 human names that Lena didn't recognize, junior officers she had never met, who had spent 3 years being in rooms with Verk observers, making tea in kitchen annexes, conducting granular protocol reviews, being present in the way that she had told Tessavril was the only real methodology. She read the statement twice. She thought about her grandmother, who had died in the 3rd year of Lena's career, before the Korth mediation, before any of the footnotes, who had never known her granddaughter would spend 18 years in rooms between species, trying to do, on an interstellar scale, the thing she had done in a kitchen in a valley that smelled of cedar smoke. Assume that the person in the room had needs and address them, and let that be the beginning. The gas giant turned, amber and ochre in the space beyond the viewport. 11 warships had flown home. And in a hegemony briefing room she would never see, 4 young officers who had learned to make tea were teaching someone else what the making felt like, and whether it was different from the ordering, and what that difference was called. Sareth Dahl appeared at the viewport, as she sometimes did. "The commentary on the protocol is mixed," she said. "It usually is, with things that work quietly. There is an argument that we gave away structural advantage, that the hegemony gained more visibility into our operations than we gained into theirs." "That argument will be made," Lena said. "It's not wrong on the numbers. Verk observers are better trained than ours were at the start. They extracted more information faster. You're not troubled by that." "I'm troubled by it at the level where I keep track of what we gave and what we got," Lena said. "At that level, yes, it's uncomfortable." She looked at the planet. "But at the level where I think about what the hegemony does with what it observed, and what our people did with what they observed, and what the bilateral protocol does when the next vessel flies toward the next mineral signature, I'm less troubled." A pause. "Kethorin Dusavril spent 3 years watching us work. He watched us work granularly, in subcommittees, in the sessions where nothing dramatic happened. He now knows, in the way you only know things from sustained observation, that the transparency is not a mask." She paused. "That knowledge changes how he behaves, which changes what the space between us looks like, which changes what the next generation of hegemony officers believes is possible." She turned away from the viewport. "You can't buy that with structural advantage." Sareth Dahl was quiet. "You are a long-game player," she said. "I told you that," Lena said, "at the beginning. You told me. I understood the words." Sareth Dahl folded her fingers into the configuration that Lena had come to read as something like deep respect, the kind that had been earned rather than offered automatically. "I understand the thing now." Lena nodded. "That," she said, "is what 3 years of being in rooms together does." She picked up her mug, cold coffee again, because she always forgot to drink it while it was hot when she was thinking about something, and held it anyway for the warmth it still carried, for the habit of it, for the small, ordinary dignity of having made it herself and brought it here and let the moment have its weight. The fleet did not return. The door stayed open. And somewhere in the long, slow work of species learning to share a sky, a junior officer was sitting on a kitchen stool, watching steam rise from a cup, trying to understand whether the making was different from the ordering, and finding slowly, through practice and repetition and genuine curiosity, that it was. That it always had been. That this was possibly the oldest human secret carried in the simplest possible gesture. You are in the room. You have needs. Here.